Hi, I'm Amber O'Neill Johnston from Heritage Mom, and I am popping on today just to chat for a bit about a topic that is becoming increasingly kind of a hot topic in the Charlotte Mason circles. And that is whether Charlotte Mason education is diverse. So many people say that Charlotte Mason lacks diversity or that the education is centered around the stories of white people, that it, doesn't include diverse voices, or that Charlotte Mason is not representative of our nation, or our world. And I understand why a lot of people are saying that. And so I want to give a little bit of information from my perspective as a Charlotte Mason mom. My kids are 12, 10, 8, and 6, and we've been using Charlotte Mason's principles in our homeschool from the very beginning. And I think a lot of the source of the misunderstanding about a Charlotte Mason education is the confusion between Charlotte Mason's philosophy and how we see that philosophy put into practice on the internet. So Charlotte Mason's philosophy is broad and expansive. It's not a prescriptive recipe. And to do Charlotte Mason, as some people say, or to spread the feast, or to provide a Charlotte Mason education for children, does not require that you use a certain set of books or very, distinct set of resources or a list of people that have to be studied. It's much bigger than that. And a lot of times people are looking at what one person or one school or one group of people have put together based on their interpretations of her philosophy and the books that they've chosen, the musicians and the artists and the poets, and the stories that they've chosen and selected as part of their curriculum. And when people see that online, and the vast majority of what they're going to see is often lacking in diverse voices. And so they're saying, well, there's Charlotte Mason. That's what Charlotte Mason is. And I guess I just want to make sure that people understand that there's a difference between her philosophy, a way of educating children, and a book list or a list of songs to be sung for a year or each term. The goal as educators for us, whether we're educating our own children or other people's children, the goal should be to offer a very generous portion of what makes up our own country and the history of our own country, and then to set all of that in its proper place within the world. So this means that the study of American history should be quite colorful, full of color, because that's the country that we live in. If you're listening, you're in the United States. And so if we're presenting a very white history and calling that American history, and then everything else is kind of like an ethnic study or world studies or something like that. In some countries that may be true. Much of their history is based on one kind of culture or ethnicity. But in America, American history, our American history studies should be rich with the stories of so many people, whether it's Indigenous people and African American stories, immigrant stories from other places all across the world, not just Western Europe. Those should all be part of the story because all of those people came together to make America what it is today. And then, when we look at our world history is an opportunity for us to expand once again and look at what was happening in different areas of the world when we're studying. So when we're studying medieval times, we wouldn't only be talking about the feudal system in Europe, but we would also be talking about the great African kingdoms that were going on at that same time. And When we're talking about what's happening in a certain part of the world, we can look and see also what was happening in Asia at that time, and where what was Genghis Khan doing at that time, for example. That's a book I read with the kids, and placing that all within our book of centuries or our timelines, where the children can see that everywhere in the world there are things happening, great and not so great, triumphant and tragic. And that's just part of this kind of story that unfolds for the children throughout their education. And then, within the history, we have our nonfiction history, but those diverse voices should naturally bubble up in our historical fiction, in our biographies, and then even beyond history. It's often easier to begin to be more inclusive in a Charlotte Mason curriculum when we start with history. And that's okay to start there, but we can't just stop there, because much, especially when you're dealing with African American history, much of the history is traumatic. And that doesn't mean that the stories don't need to be told. They're very important, but we can't just leave the children there. It's just, there's tragedy and trial and trauma, but we also need to introduce them to the beauty. And in that the easiest ways within to naturally do that within a Charlotte Mason education are through the art and the music and the poetry. All of those are areas where we can show children the beautiful side of every culture. And again, we wouldn't want to present it as like, well, here are all of the kind of normal or traditional or white things to study, and we'll throw in a couple of voices over here and there. We don't need to even over talk that with the kids. There should be a rich and abundant feast of all sorts of creators and writers and thinkers and idea makers, and it should just naturally flow throughout the curriculum. We don't need to stand on a soapbox and explain to the children what we're doing, and here is your Black artist, in February or anything like that. It's nice to celebrate Black History Month, by the way, but I'm just saying that it's a big deal to us, but it shouldn't be. All of these things should be a part of our children's education, and they should be there because they were always supposed to be there. And so I don't think that we need to explicitly make a huge deal about it, but that we just need to get to doing the work to make our curriculum and our lesson choices, our lesson plans match what we know is right and true and good and beautiful. Now, that doesn't mean that we will never have explicit conversations about how our history in the past is still impacting and will always impact the current situation, right? That's how history, it's part of our story still. But when you think of, United States history, it has the things that happened before have a significant impact on what's happening right now. It's impossible for our children to understand what's going on with our world and with our country now without making that connection between history and today. And so, yes, we have those conversations about social issues. We connect and bridge the past and connect it to what's happening today. We can talk about all the things. We should talk about all the things. Those discussions come up through our literature and our reading, through the study of current events. And so I don't mean to say that, well, as long as we're studying people, a variety of people, we never have to talk about the tough stuff. That's not true. We do have to have those conversations. But I think that it's important to note that when a curriculum feels all white, I'm hesitant to say whitewash, that term is used so often, but that's what a lot of people think about Charlotte Mason's education, and a Charlotte Mason education. And I think that when that is the case, that we are making sure that we're using the right language and saying the interpretation or the practice, the way her philosophy is being put into practice in this organization or in this family or in this school or classroom or wherever it may be, needs to be worked on. And they're not taking advantage of the fullness and the breadth of what should be laid before their students. But it's not her philosophy that is whitewashed or for white people or about white people. That's just simply not true. And if anything, I think it's the exact opposite. One of the reasons I'm so attracted to Charlotte Mason's philosophy for my family is because of her ideas are so her ideas transcend race and ethnicity. Her ideas, the way that she suggests that we educate children, it leaves so much room for you to bring in the thinkers, of a wide variety of people. So I'll share a couple of quotes I pulled for her from her. One thing she says is, we introduce children as early as possible to the contemporary history of other countries, as the study of English history alone is apt to lead to a certain insular and arrogant habit of mind. Those are her words. Later, she says, we cannot live sanely unless we know that other peoples are as we are with a difference, that their history is as ours with a difference, that they too have been represented by their poets and their artists, that they too have their literature and their national life. And in the case of America, we have a shared national life, a shared body of literature and art and all that. But we have a lot of subcultures that exist within our larger American culture. And each of those, they also have these things that she mentioned. And so you can look at it within our own country, but then you can take it broader and look at that, as you kind of look at the whole globe. So just those two quotes, I could go on, right? Those are not the words of someone who was looking to limit what's taught to children in regard to what they're exposed to from people who are different than them. Those are not her words. Her words are the exact opposite. So I just want to encourage everyone to think deeply about the difference between Charlotte Mason's philosophy, her writings, her words, the words of people who knew her and worked with her, the things that she left behind for us to learn from and grow from. There's a difference between that and what someone or group of people have, how they've interpreted her work. And every time someone has interpreted her work differently than how we would interpret her work, doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. It doesn't always mean that we're wrong. Um, there's room. Again, it's broad and it's expansive, and there's room to interpret things differently. And sometimes when we listen to maybe why someone is doing something a certain way in their home or in their class, I know the times that I've listened, I've really come to understand more about how they ended up where they were. And my thoughts and feelings and opinions are based on my experiences, and theirs are based on theirs. And I've come to compromise with quite a number of people where we've seen each other's point of view. So I will say I do believe definitively that a Charlotte Mason education should be diverse. It should be inclusive. It should be filled with representative voices for Black and Brown people within our own country and around the world. I believe that is the right thing to do. The degree to which you do that and the way that you do that, I think we all have the flexibility and freedom to do it in a way that works for our family, for our school, and for our class. I don't feel like it has to be the same for all of us. So maybe I can hop on again sometime and talk about this more, but I hope this clarifies. And a lot of this is my humble opinion, but some of it I believe is fact when we turn to her own words. So a Charlotte Mason education can be an education for all. It can be for anyone, and it can be made to feel just right for the children that we are working with or charged to lead, if done in a way that shows that we see them and we want them to feel seen and within their education, and we want them to see others. So thank you for your time. I'll hop back on again soon.